Welcome, everyone, to Designing Introductory History Courses for Student Success. My name is Brendan Gillis. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning for the American Historical Association. And today's program is part of AHA Learn, an online series focused on highlighting compelling ideas in history education. And boy, do we have a great conversation lined up for you today. Our event provides an occasion to celebrate the AHA's publication of Designing Introductory History Courses for Student Success, a collection of essays and case studies edited by Julia Brookins and Laura Ansley, drawing on insights and data developed through the AHA's History Gateways initiative, generously funded by the Mellon Foundation. Designing intro courses offers reflections and suggestions about what instructional faculty and other higher ed decision makers can do to put the history discipline to work for today's students. Nationwide, approximately 1 in 4 students who enroll in intro history courses will either fail, withdraw, or earn a grade that may not qualify for credit toward graduation. This is obviously a big problem, and History Gateways brought together faculty from across the country to try and figure out what and how much we as history educators can do to combat it. It's my pleasure to introduce Ann Hyde. Ann Hyde is Vice President of the AHA's Professional Division and Professor of History at the University of Oklahoma, where she has served as Editor-in-Chief of the Western Historical Quarterly and Faculty Coordinator of the U.S. History Survey. From 1992 to 2015, she was in the History Department at Colorado College, and she was the Faculty Director of the college's Teaching and Learning Center for 4 years. So she knows a lot about this subject. She's a specialist in the U.S. West and Indigenous America. And she's with us today in part because the publication includes a powerful essay that Anne co-wrote with Kenneth Pomeranz about the value of intro courses as a venue for making historical thinking available to everyone. Thanks and welcome, Anne.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. So, obviously, as VP of the AHA's Professional Division, really thinking about keeping a history course as a key piece of a student's experience and making it, an obvious part of general education really is essential to our profession. We won't survive without that course drawing people in. So, as a way to start, since we're us, I have to do a little history. So the AHA and I got started thinking about history education through the AHA's tuning program. And at that point, we focused a couple of tiers up from the introductory class. And we were thinking about how students choose classes and why classes should build on each other in obvious ways. And a key piece of this now more than a decade-old project from my last stint at the AHA on the teaching division is really making what we do as instructors and historians visible. It's also making sure that students leave a course or a major able to effectively describe what they learned. But we were a little blind in that whole project about how students fared at the beginning. Now, debates about the best introductory course are absolutely not new. Great scholars have shared their work and their courses, and we will continue to have and really enjoy that debate. But what was missing was data, and data about particular students. So, of course, the big wake-up call was Drew Koch's 2017 essay, which is based on data gathered by the Gardner Institute. It wasn't going well in that introductory class, and thousands of students were failing, losing hope and money, and leaving college. So the task of tracking DFWI rates for a range of demographic groups tells a very hard story about history's role in driving students of color into debt and away from education. So this Gateways project is a small but very important step to take that data seriously and to test if differently designed introductory courses enable more students to succeed. Now that sounds simple, but it's not. Equity is never simple. So as the instructor this semester for 325 University of Oklahoma students in our required survey, I am all ears about these initial reports from these instructors who did the hard work of believing the data and changing what they did. And now I'm going to introduce the expert running the show, and that's Dr. Stephanie Foote, and she is Associate VP at the John N. Gardner Institute of Excellence in Undergraduate Education. But prior to joining the Institute staff in 2017, Stephanie founded a Master of Science program in first-year studies and was a professor of education at Kennesaw State University. Her scholarship and consultative work includes the role of first-year seminars and experiential pedagogy on student engagement. So we are in very good hands with experts on this topic. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you as well to Brendan for the wonderful introduction to this session. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I'm not a historian, as you can probably tell from the biography that Anne just shared, but I have been an active member of the AHA since 2018 and have been welcomed into this organization and into the work that we've done around History Gateways. So I'm not going to belabor this because I know that many of you would love to hear, as I want to hear, the inspiring stories of the work of the faculty who have been involved in History Gateways. So in just a moment, I'll introduce them. But what I'd like to do now is to invite you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you should be able to see it if you hover over your Zoom screen. At the very bottom, there's a Q&A box, and I would invite you to use that to post questions to the presenters. And I will have the great fortune of serving as your moderator. So I'll be looking at those questions and asking them back to the presenters. So each presenter will be sharing a bit about what they've done and some of the outcomes of their work. And you'll have a chance to hear from each of the three of them, but feel free at any point to put a question into the question box. I will ask as appropriate. So feel free to use that, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenters. And again, we're joined by some really wonderful faculty members who have done this work in History Gateways. And I think that you will find that they and their work are inspiring. I know that every time we have the opportunity to be together, whether it's virtually or physically, I always learn so much from them and feel very inspired by their work. So we have first Kelly Hopkins. Kelly is an assistant professor of early American history at the University of Houston. She regularly teaches U.S. history to 1877 and focuses on increasing student engagement and improving student success. In 2023, Kelly won 2 Teaching Excellence Awards, which is amazing, one from the Provost's office and one from the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Her first book, which I can't pronounce the title of, I know she'll pronounce it for us, will be out in spring 2025. Kelly, can you please share with us the title of your book?
Yes, it's Iroquois Haudenosaunee Life and Culture, 1630 to 1783.
Thank you so much. Our next presenter is Sandra Frink. Sandra is the Chair of Humanities at Roosevelt University in Chicago, where she is an Associate Professor of History and the Director of Women's and Gender Studies. In addition to the U.S. History Survey course, she teaches courses on the history and memory of the Civil War, the power of popular culture, the use of oral history in creating community histories, and the history of gender and race in the Atlantic world. And then lastly, we have Tomiko Meeks. Tomiko is an instructor at Texas Southern University and a 4th-year PhD candidate at Howard University. Tomiko teaches U.S. and African American history and the general studies capstone. She's dedicated to student success, serves as a Tier 1 faculty member, and works directly with first-year student advisors and first-year students. Very close to my heart. And now I'm going to hand it over to our presenters who will lead us again through some short presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions. Kelly, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. I am going to share my screen very quickly. So Stephanie, if you could please let me know that you see it. I haven't shared on Zoom for a really long time.
I can see your presentation, but it's not in presenter mode just yet. There it is. Perfect.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm Kelly Hopkins. I'm at the University of Houston, and I want to just run through a little bit of information about the students I have in my classroom to kind of set up how the dynamics of the classroom can create challenges for the professors and for the students. And I teach normally 300 students in a large auditorium setting it's just a lecture only format and it's face-to-face. So at the University of Houston, we have approximately 40,000 students, and about half of those students are first time in college students. So many of them don't understand the expectations and responsibilities of being in college. That can lead to some of the struggles that they may have, particularly in large auditorium settings. We are also a minority-majority institution, so we have a lot of different, family backgrounds and experiences in the classroom, so a lot of different interests in our courses. Here at my classes, the vast majority of my students are in their first or second year, so there's very few juniors and seniors, and I'm sure that's the case with most people who teach these introductory courses. So these are kids fresh out of high school, really are just trying to get their heads wrapped around what college involves. Then a lot of the challenges involve sort of their enthusiasm in being in the class, in that the vast majority of them freely admit that they are only in the class because it is required to graduate. Some say that they're interested, but they're in it because it's a required course. Very few students are there because of their love of history. So obviously that can create some problems for us. We don't have many majors who are in my classes, so basically none of them are history majors, and a lot of them are in the natural sciences and mathematics, and then in other places around campus. So without having that sort of history motivation can make it a little more challenging. So walking into this classroom with 300 students who may not feel very engaged, we talked about high D, F, W, and I rates, and I really wanted to focus on those things and try to focus on students who are kind of at the bottom of that grade scale to try to improve student performance and increase their engagement in the class. I've been involved with the Gateways to Completion initiative with the Gardner Institute since 2019. I have engaged in many different types of reforms to the class. Things kind of took on a new level of importance with the COVID pandemic and students, being at home and then coming back to school and being a little concerned about being back in school. So lately, those were really some of my main focuses in trying to change the course. So in redesigning the class, I really wanted to focus on allowing students to be more engaged and see themselves in the history. So if they could focus on topics that interested them personally, that would try to, resolve their lack of engagement. I wanted students to kind of start working with each other so that they could create mini communities within the classroom and have a sense of accountability to their classmates and get them more involved and buy into completing the coursework. I also really wanted to reduce high stakes assessments like midterm exams or big papers, because if students do poorly on those things, it's very difficult for them to recover. But if we have many more smaller, low stakes assignments, doing poorly in a couple weeks or a couple of assignments isn't going to ruin their grade. And then I also wanted to focus on how can we scaffold their skill development throughout the semester instead of training them in things and then grading them on something at the very end, have these lower stakes assignments throughout the semester to see where they are and to understand if they're learning the skills that we want them to learn. So to accomplish some of these things that I really wanted to focus on, I came up with a group research project for the students. Students pick their research topic of choice very early in the semester. This semester, we did it on day 2. I divide the students based on their choices into groups of 6. We spend a lot of time in class working on the skills and assignments that I want them to complete. So you kind of have to give up on needing to cover everything in lecture and focus on the skills that you really want them to learn and spending time helping them to learn those things. These research projects require students to engage with primary and secondary sources, and they have a required number of each. So they need to learn the differences between primary and secondary sources, and we work on how to investigate and analyze those sources to see if they're reliable then how they can incorporate that evidence into creating a coherent group research project with 5 other classmates. And now that we are back and it's a huge auditorium, people can't present to their classmates. So we have the students record a formal presentation, usually on Teams or YouTube. So they're getting a lot of digital skills in the process. They're working on communication and other things that are going to be valuable outside of history and be valuable in any career choice that they have. This group research project has multiple aspects to it, and in total it's worth 25% of their grade. So it's not something they can say, well, I'm just not going to do this. Like sometimes they'll say, I'm just not going to go to the midterm. That's not really an option here. Just an example of the 10 research topics that I allow students to choose from. These are all incredibly broad topics. I will say that technology and industry is always the big winner because there's so many STEM kids on campus in different majors. But any of these topics is just a huge umbrella that students can, kind of hone in on what interests them the most. Learning objectives for this large portion of their course grade, students comment at the end of the semester that this project really helped them to focus on their communication skills, really helped them to focus on their time management and collaboration. And again, these are things that are going to transcend just completing their history course. History specific, though, we're working on a research agenda. We're talking about primary and secondary sources, proper citations, and then how to incorporate that evidence into a larger project. So those are just some more of the learning objectives that are clearly outlined for the students. Some further learning objectives involve them thinking about how they have developed this research project, why they have chosen particular primary sources. So there's a lot of self and peer reflection involved. So the metacognition that goes into thinking about what types of learners they are and how they can improve on those things. A lot of it is reflecting on themselves, but since it's a group project and I can't get to know all 300 students, I like them to kind of reflect on the contributions of some of their classmates and their teammates. And then the project doesn't end with them presenting and recording their own research. They need to watch the presentations of a few other groups outside of their topic. So it's broadening their understanding of different experiences throughout early American history. Now, incorporating this group research project, these assessments throughout the semester, the vast majority of them are graded as individual assessments. So even though they are working in a team on the project, they are getting individual grades throughout the course of the semester. And so they realize that this isn't just something that they have to completely depend on their classmates for. And then I just wanted to provide a breakdown of the grades from last fall. With all of the projects that came together. These are just not the group research project, but the overall course grades skews very high on the A end. But then at the other end, the D+, D minus, and F rates are much, much lower as a result of having multiple assignments throughout the semester. Having that collaboration so students can be connected with others and help each other succeed. And, just learning the ropes of the college experience. I've been very pleased with incorporating the group research project. I know a lot of people say the kids are over group research. They did it all the time in high school. But this is a super organized and structured set of assignments. And the students say, even though it's a freshman level class, that this is like really helping to prepare them for other classes. No matter where they go, they're going to have to work with colleagues. So I will end there and I will stop sharing my screen and thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. There are some questions that have come in for you, but we're going to hold those until we get through all the presentations, and then we'll come back to as many of them as we can answer live. So next, I'd like to call on Sandra to see if she's willing to make her presentation. Sandra?
And I'm going to replace the current share with the materials I have.
Perfect. Thank you. We can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. As Stephanie noted, I am from Roosevelt University in Chicago, and I'll just point out that the demographics at Roosevelt are very similar to the University of Houston, though our classes are smaller. We haven't taught 300 students. The title of my presentation is A Thematic Approach to Promoting Historical Thinking and Student Success. And this was the redesign that came out of our affiliation with the AHA and the Gardner Institute. My colleagues and I developed this approach when we asked ourselves, what do we really want our students to get out of the survey? We decided it was not the memorization of details. Rather, we wanted them to think critically about the meaning of the past and its relevance in the present. So what is this thematic approach? At its most basic, it focuses on themes rather than the facts and the chronology that so often seem to drive the survey. It also allows us to introduce enduring concepts that help students organize knowledge and think deeper about issues that continue to matter today. This creates continuity between the surveys, as many of the themes from the first half appear again in the second half. And yet it also helps emphasize historical contingency. And this framing actually enhances our ability to emphasize historical thinking by asking questions, using evidence, and analyzing sources. And finally, we developed multiple ways to incorporate the themes. I'm going to explain just a few, four to be exact, that are practical and relatively easy to add to an existing course without a lot of revision, regardless of whether you have 10 students or 300 students. So this is the sequence I frequently use to incorporate these themes. Part 1, orientation, simply involves asking students what words come to mind when thinking about a particular era. In a large class, this can be done with an online tool like Mentimeter. We usually just ask a volunteer to write them down. And this exercise helps students think about what they already know, what they think they know, and perhaps what they don't know about a particular time period. Usually, they mention the concepts that we hope that they're going to mention, and they often have some that we haven't even thought of. We save the list, and then we make that accessible throughout the unit. Part 2, application, has to do with using the themes during the unit. One way is to ask students how a particular primary source reflects or embodies one of the themes. This can be a low-stakes, in-class writing assignment that develops skills such as creating an argument, defining terms, using evidence to support a claim. If grading everyone's work is prohibitive, you can ask students to share their work or discuss various approaches collectively. I often give credit for completing the assignment and for actively engaging in the discussion. Part 3 involves synthesis. As the unit comes to a close, we revisit the list, and students can determine whether themes should be deleted, revised, or added based on what they've learned. This is really an excellent opportunity to have them define a term more precisely within its historical context. And then finally, at the end of the unit, we ask them to reflect on the meaning of a theme in the past and its continued relevance in the present. Again, we require the use of primary sources and the development of an argument. The assignment, though, can vary. It may be another low-stakes assignment. It could be a group project, a more involved essay or video, or even an infographic, which I've used to some success. So what's the impact? We have noted the effects of this approach, particularly in attendance and participation. We've seen it noted in our course evaluations and to some extent in our DFWI rates. What we've found is that students appreciate that the approach is learner-directed. By requiring students to come up with the themes and then choose which ones to analyze, we grant them a large degree of autonomy over their learning. Similarly, it promotes engagement and belonging. Activities like this not only democratize the classroom, but also allow students to explore the relevance of the material and the discussion to their own lives. In addition, it requires higher level critical thinking, moving beyond facts and details to grapple with meaning and significance. It also introduces historical contingency. It really helps us all be more careful about how we use terms, because the process requires us to see how they were defined by actors in the past and contrast that with our contemporary understandings. It also enables skill development in low stakes scenarios that can build confidence over the semester. And finally, it promotes reflection and it extends learning. Focusing on themes we've found is a really tangible means of thinking about what we know, what we don't know, and honestly, what we'd like to learn more about. And that's certainly what we hope our students leave the class with. So that is it. Thank you. I am going to stop sharing and I will hand it over to Tomiko.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. I do not have a presentation. I've had some challenges this week, but I do want to tell you about the demographics at Texas Southern University. I feel like we may be in between the two schools that you've previously heard. And our population, we have 9,000 students. And so in roughly 9,000 students. And so in our survey classes, the classes are for TSU relatively large. We usually have 100 plus in our survey classes. And as for myself, I'm also the leader of the core, and we have 4 full-time instructors, and the rest of our faculty are adjuncts. And so that tends to present a bit of a challenge, especially if our adjuncts are not returning every semester. But our core group, who also participated in the gateways with me, the way that we redesigned our courses is that we took our Common Core assignment, and we've done pretty much many of the things that have been talked about before, such as scaffolding assignments. And we also made that Common Core assignment more interactive and more collaborative. And so, for example, in my class, one of the things that I've done is I've invited the librarian to come into the class so that students hear from me talking about the use of primary and secondary sources, but then they also talk to our dedicated librarian. And in doing the Common Core assignment, what they have to do is make an appointment to meet outside of class time with the librarian to come up with their primary sources and their secondary sources. And so in scaffolding those assignments, they will do an annotated bibliography. And we've really worked with them to teach them that skill of doing an annotated bibliography. And then in terms of the rest of the paper, it's also scaffolded, and we work really hard with them in formulating arguments and understanding what needs to go in the introduction of their papers. And what I did last year is I started having the survey classes, I had them do peer reviews of each other. I normally would only do that in the capstone class, but I was seeing how effective it was in the capstone class. And so I scaled down the peer review and implemented it in the survey class. And I broke them up into groups. And so you stayed with that group, you stayed with your group the entire semester, and you worked on different drafts. And so they would get feedback from me, but then they also receive feedback from their peers. And it taught them how to use a rubric and what exactly is going into the grading process. And that was very effective because they were holding each other accountable. And then we also implemented in our collaborative learning group work, because these classes are so large. We scaled down from lecturing like my classes meet on Tuesday and Thursday. So I won't lecture on both days. I will lecture on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, we do group work. And they're getting the readings ahead of time. And their charge is they have to read the documents, annotate the documents. And then when they come into class, they're working in groups, and they have a set of questions that they're responsible for answering. And so they're working together and they're thinking through these questions critically. And then depending on what the topic is, and I'll give you an example. So this week, my students were looking at Booker T. Washington, Anna Julia Cooper, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Henry Grady, and Ida B. Wells. And so they did the group work. And then towards the end of the class, what we did was I opened up discussion. And so they're going back and forth, and they're really seeing how all of these individuals who were really contemporaries, how what they were writing about sort of interacted with each other. And I really made the point for them to look at Anna Julia Cooper, for example, who was writing before Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and what she's saying about education and who should be educated. And then they look at Booker T. Washington and what he says at the Atlanta Compromise. And then you have W.E.B. Du Bois, who comes much later and is critiquing. And so it sort of spins on its axis this idea that we've come to have about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and the debate that went on between the two of them when you enter Anna Julia Cooper into that mix. And students were really sort of thinking critically and grappling with, okay, so we've never really heard about women in this debate. And so it's a whole new framing of and thinking historically. And students afterwards, they were like, we've never heard that before. And they were really engaged and they wanted to learn more. And so when we were thinking about redesigning the classes, that is what we were looking for, ways in which to get students engaged and being able to see themselves, because our population is predominantly African American. And so looking at how African Americans at the turn of the century were talking about education and how the race was going to progress. And so it's still things that we're really grappling with today. And students also at the end of the semester, we have them do a reflective piece where they can pick any assignment that they've worked on during the semester and talk about that assignment. And it could be they did really well on the assignment, or maybe they didn't do as well as they wanted to do. And they talked through the process. And putting that piece in was really transformative, not just for the faculty, but also for the students, because they were able to look at exactly what it was that they were doing during the semester, whether it was they weren't spending enough time, they waited until the last minute to start on an assignment, and they should have followed the timeline that was given to them. And I have a lot of students who will take me again, and even they end up in the capstone. And what they tell me is that what you taught us, in the survey classes, not only helped me in the rest of my history classes, but it also helped me in other classes. And I wasn't getting that really before. And I'm learning it was the way that we were conducting our classes, because it was heavy content. And the time that we live in now, it's just not conducive to heavy content. Like, there needs to be more collaborative work, more active learning, because that is where students are. And another thing that I've implemented in my classes is using what students are doing in their everyday life. So I did a research assignment, and it was an Instagram assignment for Black history. And so the theme this year was Blacks in the arts. And so students were able to pick any artist. It had to be Houston-based, so it was local. And when they were doing their research using primary sources, they turned those into these little snippets that they would write a blurb. They had to have a different image of whoever their artist was every time. And we turned that into an Instagram page. And students were very excited about doing that type of project. And it's not a traditional, 10, 15 page paper, but it was something that students were excited about doing, and they showed up to do the assignment. And another thing that was transformative was taking assignments, moving them off of our LMS, we use Blackboard, and doing more assignments in class. Because one of the things that we noticed post-COVID was that students weren't coming to class. And they felt that even though they were taking a face-to-face class, well, if my instructor is loading everything on the LMS, I can just skip class and I'll still be able to get what I need out of the class. And that's not true. You may pass the class with a C, but you're not really getting what it is that you need. You're not getting the skills, and you're not really learning the content. So I've moved most of my assignments off of Blackboard, and we're working in class. And that is really helping students because they're becoming more engaged, they're reading, and I have them working together. And I tell them, I sent them an email, for example, at the start of this semester. And I said, you have your groups, you know who your group members are. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide how it is that you all are going to interact with each other. You can use GroupMe, you can use the messaging inside of Blackboard, you can exchange phone numbers, but I need to see that you all are working together. And a lot of students turn those groups into their study circle. And that has really helped them, especially when it comes time to the final, because they're studying together. And when they study together, they're bouncing ideas off of each other. And if someone is not really understanding a particular topic or a concept, I will get students who they'll email me for the whole group and they're asking, and I'm like, okay, that's good. Because before that wasn't really happening. And they were, I think, in many ways afraid. And I've also established that the class is a safe space, that we're all here to learn. I'm even here to learn. I'm learning from you. And so whatever question you have, please feel free to ask. Nobody is going to shame you in this class for asking a question, because I want students to feel comfortable, because not everybody, and Dr. Hopkins said this, most of our students that are in the classes are not history majors. I probably have 1% of the students who take my class who are history majors. And so in many ways, they're sort of intimidated by history because in the past, maybe they've had a history instructor who was focused on learning dates and names and concepts. And that's typically what they ask. And like, are we gonna have to memorize all of this stuff? And I'm like, no, like, do you know how long it took me to memorize all of this? I would not ask you to do that. And so once they sort of feel that burden lift, you start to see a shift, and then they're more engaged. And I try to curate readings, primary readings, that sort of speak to the time that we're in right now, so that students can see themselves in what they're reading. And then also using documentaries and different, things of that nature, because I want them, all of our faculty, we want them to be fully engaged in the courses that they're taking. What I've learned through this process is that what worked for me when I was in undergrad is not working for our students. And so I'm constantly trying to fine tune my class. And I may not even do the exact same thing that I did the semester before, especially if it didn't work. And so I try to gauge, especially like in the first 2 weeks, I try to gauge the students and see where they are. And so if I need to tweak the syllabus a little bit, I never add anything that's going to be punitive, right? But I try to tweak it so that I'm able to capture everybody, because what I've learned over the time that I've been teaching is that all students have different learning styles. And so I want to be able to incorporate that as much as I can into the classroom. And that's been effective. And most of our DWF and I rates come from students just not coming to class. And that has been a huge improvement since we've been in the Gateways program. And so we're still trying to figure out ways to combat students not coming to class, which is one reason why I switched to doing many of our assignments in class. What I would say that our faculty have gotten from the process, those are the faculty that are full-time, is that it's taught us to be more thoughtful about how we are structuring our classes and what we're actually doing with the students. And that's all. And I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tomiko. We have some fantastic questions in the chat, and I want to recognize everyone who's posed a question. We're going to get to some of these in just a moment. Thank you also to Kelly, who's answered a lot of questions about her presentation and has posted those for everyone. I want to first summarize, and actually Brad put this in the Q&A, so thank you so much, Brad. Some of the common themes, and I was thinking along these lines too. So some of the themes that have come from the presentations you all have shared: have students practicing skills in class, so actually doing some of the work physically in class. As you talked about, Tomiko, restructuring your assignments, taking them off of Blackboard and bringing them into the classroom so students are really engaging with each other and with the material actively in class. Collaborative learning, group work works. I don't think it doesn't, because even if students are resistant to it, if it's structured in a way and they're supported, as you all have said, it can really yield fabulous results. Scaffold assignments, we've heard lots of examples of that, creating assignments using social media, if you can. Fewer big research papers, so I've done that in my own courses. Again, scaffolding, taking a large research assignment, helping students complete smaller pieces, working up to it. Lectures are a poor substitute for more direct student engagement. I would say that probably balancing lecture and opportunities for student engagement, helping students to see themselves in history and the history that we're teaching is important. More lower stakes opportunities for practicing skills is better than higher stakes exams and papers. So I think those are all very accurate based on what you all have shared, and also, really speak to what's in the booklet as well, some of the other stories. So lots of questions, but I'm going to try to get to some of them that will appeal to all of you. As you think about this work, what have been some of the greatest challenges? I know obviously we did this during the pandemic. We began in spring 2019, and we were really in the height of it, the work that you all were doing at the beginning of the pandemic. So this played out in very different ways than we imagined. So what were some of the challenges, even, considering and beyond the pandemic, that you experienced in this work? And then how did you push through? How did you get to the other side and get to where you are today, even during those challenging times?
I'll just provide maybe a short answer to that. When we're in graduate school, we are teaching assistants, and so we get information about the survey. It seems like the one thing that doesn't change ever. And I think that one of the greatest challenges and opportunities that this process provided was the chance to just to destabilize that. And that's giving up that control and taking new chances is, it can be kind of scary in a way, because, you're in front of a huge class and some things don't work. Sometimes it just falls flat. But I think that the real opportunity has been to embrace that flexibility, to embrace the challenge, to embrace the unknown, the chaos, and enjoy it, and that makes the learning, I think, also collective, which is a joy.
I would agree. I know one of the challenges that we had during COVID, I actually taught on campus, which was really weird during COVID, where students were sort of going through this phase. I don't even know how to describe it really. There was a lot of depression that was setting in because they were so isolated. And even my students who were coming to class, they were, feeling the same things. And then they started not coming to class. And I'm a very interactive instructor. And even when they finally moved me to courses online, I never will really allow students to sit in a class and just be quiet because the class is always interactive. I walk around, I'm looking at what you're doing. I'll touch you on your shoulder. I'll ask you, can you answer this question? And, it was really to get students fully engaged. And when we had to go online, that was really challenging, because then it was an opportunity for some students to really hide behind the screen. But then you had other students who became more vocal because they weren't in the classroom. And then when we came back, I feel like the challenge was even greater, because you had some students who wanted to be back on campus, and then you had other students who didn't want to be back on campus. And so just trying to navigate all of these different challenges, it was really taxing on our faculty. And so we worked through it. And one of the issues that I said before was about students actually coming to class, because they would come up with all sorts of excuses of why they couldn't be there. And we were like, okay, so we have to figure this out. And so now, we're 4 years out. We're still figuring it out, but I feel like we're getting a better handle on what to do, and how to engage students, and how to really pull them back into the classroom. And I'll give you an example. This was in last fall, in our building on the first floor, 2 of our auditoriums flooded, and we had to move spaces. And I went from having 100 students per class, and it went all the way down to like 25, because students were just, it was too much. And I was getting like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm depressed. And so I had to go to the dean and talk to him, because I'm like, I don't know what, I don't know what to do here, because if students are not coming to class, then they're going to fail. And what do you do? And so I did all of these sort of efforts and trying to entice students to come back. It worked a little bit, but what I'm noticing now is that if there's any slight challenge, right, we have to like really be fully engaged with students. I was emailing students, checking on them, making sure that they were okay. And that's what brought some of the students back, because they wanted to know that their instructor, I guess was thinking about them, that they were seen. So it's different, it's challenging.
Thank you so much. So there are some questions about the use of AI, artificial intelligence. There are quite a few of them in the Q&A. And I guess just broadly, I'd love to hear from you all about whether or not you're using AI in any of these assignments, because it's come up a lot here. And I know that it's something that a lot of us are wrestling with ourselves, whether or not to intentionally incorporate it into assignments, or how do we, get students to, how can we help them to be responsible users of artificial intelligence, understanding the many flaws associated with it. So do you have assignments in which you introduce students to AI? Do you allow them to use AI in the classroom? What have you done in your intro courses? Anybody?
I'll go ahead and start, because I used to have a lot of academic misconduct. And then when AI came on, it was nuts. And so I used it as a teaching opportunity for them, and screenshotted someone's submission and showed them how they turned in AI and how Turnitin caught it. And we all know there's problems with Turnitin, but it was like the gasp in the auditorium was hilarious, because then it just demonstrated how many students were actually using it. So this semester, last year, it was much, much better, at least as far as I could tell. Having them do a lot of work in the classroom with each other, like Tomiko says, it gets them more engaged, and kind of takes, when they have a group project and they're responsible to other students and they have to do a presentation on it, either you're memorizing AI the entire time, or you're actually doing some of the work on your own. And working in the group kind of gets them a little more involved in the research. This semester, I am flat out telling them that I'm aware they're going to be going to ChatGPT for sources. They need to provide screenshots of that engagement with ChatGPT, And so that they can think about what kinds of questions they're asking ChatGPT and how they're getting that conversation to go where they want it to go. And then I'm requiring them also to provide screenshots of the secondary sources and primary sources that they're actually using that are downloaded to their computer, or a picture of them with the book in hand. So they can't just say, yeah, I read this book on, theta produced Cherokee removal, when in fact they never read a thing. They just took it all from ChatGPT. So I'm hoping some of these things just kind of steer them in the right direction. I'm also going to have them use AI in a collaborative project in the survey or in the auditorium on what is settler colonization and how do each of the European imperialists use it. How does it play out on the ground in North America? And so that will force them to start with AI, and then how are they going to ask it questions, and what sources is AI providing them, and what do they think about these sources?
Yeah, I've used AI in the class. When it first really became like this hot topic, I had in the class AI write up a narrative about myself, and then I had students pull up my CV, and they were like, "Oh my God, like AI that's ridiculous," because it said that I had a degree in education, all of these things that I had not done. And so that was sort of my introduction to them about the fallibility of AI. But like Kelly has said, I've had students who have turned in whole research papers with not one single solitary source, and they've received a 0. And then when they try to challenge me on it, I'm like, this is a history course, and in history it's based on facts. Like, where are your sources? And then they can't say, because one thing that AI doesn't do, unless you really know, is as Dr. Hopkins said, what questions to ask, it is not going to give you the source. And so, and this was one of the reasons why I switched, and we're doing more assignments in class. And they have to, when they meet with the librarian, they have to sign a statement, and then the librarian also has to sign saying that they met with her. We went over these sources. But Dr. Hopkins, I like your idea of you taking that picture, and I want to see the source in your hand. So yeah.
Thank you so much. There is another question that I think is quite related to this and very relevant, something with which many of us struggle in these courses. How do we get our students to do the reading? So how are we engaging them and enticing them to do the reading required for our classes?
I feel like the group work, and I will say, at least in my classes, has been really effective. And it takes the first time. Like my students, we started school last week, so this is our second week. This is their first in-class assignment. They received their reading and their group assignments in the first week. And I instructed them that they needed to read and annotate, be prepared when you come into class, because you will not have time in class to read the document, and you need to be able to answer these questions. And the students saw the questions, and some of them were very basic, like introduction to a document, what are these features? And then the questions became more specific. And so I could hear some of the students saying, "Oh my God, this is so easy." I'm like, okay, we'll see. And then when it got to the point of me like really asking them in-depth questions, then it became clear that many of them had not read, because they didn't know the author. They couldn't figure out what type of document it was, even though there's an abstract right above that says that And so what I've seen in previous classes, when that first group assignment happens, by the second one, most of them have read, because they don't want to be, embarrassed, if you will, in front of their classmates. And they don't know if by the time they're doing the second one, they've become more familiar with me, and they know I'm going to call on you. If you do not raise your hand, I'm calling on you. And they want to have the answer. So I wouldn't say it's like a trick to get them to read. I see it as more of an enticement to get them to read.
I used to assign a lot of reading. I don't use a textbook because of teaching online and then COVID. I created some background materials so I don't have to spend time in class lecturing the entire time. But we always make the YOP available. That's a US history textbook for those, that's free and very good. Most of the readings I assign are primary sources. And we all know that a primary source might be 2 pages, but if it's from the 1500s or 1600s, it might be a difficult read. And so honestly, we spend a lot of time in class doing close reading. And so that will help the students who maybe skimmed it or didn't read it or read it and really didn't understand it. We all end up on the same page by the end of the class, because I would rather do a close reading of a small amount of material rather than give them a lot of material and ask them on their own to kind of absorb it all, I guess.
Yeah. Because what I've also seen is that when students get all, they have to read the chapter, they have to read all, they just zone out. They zone out, they will not come to class, right? And I agree, like scaling down the amount of reading that we're requiring them to do, because it's not what we were doing when we were in school. We have to understand that, right? We have to be able to evolve essentially with the current time. And what I'm seeing, I had a conversation with one of my cousins who teaches, and this is a pervasive problem. And I don't know if it's just in Texas, but I'm seeing it with my students. What they're doing in K through 12 has a direct correlation to what they, I guess, are comfortable with doing in college. Because in K through 12, my cousin is an English instructor, and she said that they don't have textbooks. They're not requiring them to, and she's teaching high school, to read like we were in high school. And so then they come into college in that freshman survey class, and they're not used to doing that. And so it's our job then to help them become acclimated to reading and reading on a certain level. And so I agree with you on reducing the number of readings and doing more in-class work, because a student is typically not going to say, oh, I don't understand what that means. Because again, there's sort of shame that's involved in that. And at least for myself, I want them to have a safe place to land. And it'd be okay to ask the question, well, I don't understand what this word means. Can you help me? Can you explain it? And then I also tell them, when you're reading the document, you ask the document questions and you read for what's not there. And so when they hear that, they're, many instances, they're like, oh my God, what is she saying? Let me read this a little closer. And I tell them also, you have to read it more than one time. Just like watching a film. When you're watching a film, watch it the first time for entertainment value. The second time, you need to be really looking at what's happening. I show the Manchurian Candidate when I teach the second half of US history and we get to the Cold War. And students are like all into it. And most of the time we can't even finish it in one setting. And they're like, are we going to finish watching it? Because I want to know what's going to, and so it's, it's all the things.
I also think,
Yeah,
having them read, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Sandra, to jump in here, but it's 1:59, and we have 1 minute left to wrap up. As you can see, our panelists and the people involved in History Gateways generated a lot of really compelling and often very practical ideas about how to improve student success in intro courses. If there is a thesis of this volume, it's that everyone can do something. Whatever your circumstances, whatever the constraints placed on you by your institution, there are steps, big and small, that can help more and more students succeed in intro courses. So I hate to step in and wrap things up, but this concludes designing introductory history courses for student success. We hope it was helpful and productive for all of you. Please join me remotely in thanking our panelists and presenters for a lively conversation. If you're not a member of the AHA, we hope you'll consider joining us to support programs like this. A recording of today's event will be emailed to you when it's available. Questions or feedback can be sent to ahaonline@historians.org. And please remember that copies of Designing Introductory History Courses for Student Success are available for purchase from Oxford University Press. We sent a link in the chat here. Thank you all very, very much for attending today.